It wasn't destroyed. It wasn't lost. It was hidden. A gospel once celebrated by early Christians gone, not burned in a Roman purge, not censored in a medieval council. No, it simply slipped into silence. But when it re-emerged, centuries later, buried beneath the Egyptian sands, it spoke in riddles, strange parables, whispers of divine light, and a Christ who didn't die to save, but came to wake the sleeping. The gospel of truth, praised by bishops, banished by canon. What did it say that the church could never allow into its story? Let that settle. A sacred text that called itself truth, erased. Not because it was false, but because it didn't fit. Take a breath. You won't need to rush. The truth, if it ever lived at all, has waited this long. It can wait a little longer. The desert does not forget. It hoards the things men bury, scrolls, bones, secrets. In 1945, near a place called Nag Hammadi, a clay jar cracked open the ancient silence. Inside were gospels unlike any preached from pulpits. No fire and brimstone, no sinners in need of saving. Instead, there were riddles, fragments of light, a divine mystery that had less to do with punishment and more to do with remembering. Among them lay the gospel of truth, like something overheard in a dream. Fluid, abstract, almost allergic to doctrine. It spoke of a Christ who didn't bleed for guilt, but came to pull us from a fog of forgetfulness. A Christ who saved not through sacrifice, but through knowledge, gnosis. But this gospel didn't stand alone. It had rivals, brothers, enemies, other secret teachings that tried to answer the same question: who really was Jesus? Some saw him as a revealer, some a guide. A few saw him as illusion, and one even as a trickster's pawn. This is a story of those rival gospels, the hidden messages about Christ that once competed for the soul of Christianity. Some survived in whispers, some were crushed under creeds, others, they simply faded into sand. Before we venture further into the shadows, take a moment to subscribe so you never miss a secret that history has tried to forget. The story of its unearthing begins not in a cathedral or a seminary, but in a cave, dry, crumbling, almost forgettable. In 1945, in the Egyptian town of Nag Hammadi, a farmer named Muhammad al-Saman stumbled upon a sealed clay jar. Some say he feared it might be cursed. Others say he thought it held a jinn. What it held instead was paper, ancient, brittle, and stained with centuries of dust. 52 texts bound in leather and buried since the 4th century. Among them a riddle in prose, the gospel of truth. Its name is either bold or ironic, depending on how one reads it. No, according to Matthew, no parables of fig trees or bleeding hands. Instead, a dreamscape of metaphors and gentle revelations. A divine being sent to rescue humanity, not from sin, but from error. Not through crucifixion, but by knowledge. The gospel speaks like a memory being slowly remembered, as though the act of reading it is part of a greater awakening. And yet its language is frustratingly elusive. It offers no timeline, no miracle checklist, no enemies to vanquish. It opens with silence. It closes with metaphor. It lacks tension, yet brims with urgency. And in the center, Christ, not the atoning lamb, but the revealer of hidden memory. He is the book and the voice and the message and the messenger. He is everything, and nothing the bishops later canonized. The style suggests Valentinian authorship, or at least influence. Some scholars say it might have been penned by Valentinus himself, though the text is anonymous. That anonymity, ironically, lends it more weight. It doesn't assert its authority, it flows. In this world, authority isn't declared, it's experienced. The reader isn't told what to believe, they're invited to remember. The Church, however, remembered differently. By the time of Irenaeus in the late 2nd century, a strong line was drawn between orthodoxy and heresy. Anything too abstract, too fluid, too open-ended was deemed dangerous. If salvation could come through personal revelation, what need was there for priests, for councils, for Rome? Still, one thing remains undeniable: this gospel was not marginal. It was respected enough to be copied, preserved, and buried for safekeeping. Had it been meaningless, it would not have been hidden. It would have been discarded. The physical manuscript itself tells its own tale. Written in Coptic, translated from an earlier Greek original, its pages are delicate but deliberate. Scholars noticed how carefully the text was copied, suggesting that whoever preserved it valued it deeply, and they should have. For in this single gospel, entire theological assumptions are turned upside down. Gone is the wrathful God demanding blood. In his place is a loving Father, distant only because we forgot him. Gone is sin as moral failing. Instead, there is ignorance, a fog over our minds. And Christ, he doesn't descend to be punished. He descends to remind us who we are. Of course, not everyone reads it this way. Some argue that the text is so poetic as to be meaningless, a stream of consciousness, with the illusion of depth. Others suggest it's more philosophy than scripture, a kind of early Christian meditation manual, rather than a doctrinal text. And still, there are those who insist its vagueness is the point. After all, if truth is divine, wouldn't it resist tidy summaries? Wouldn't it shimmer just beyond language like heat above desert sand? Its rediscovery also reopens old wounds about canon, about control, about which truths were deemed safe and which were buried. The fact that it was excluded from the official New Testament isn't surprising. What's surprising is how different it is from those texts that made the cut. In Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus walks and speaks and bleeds. He touches lepers. He flips tables. He dies and rises. In the gospel of truth, he feels like mist and memory. You don't see him. You remember him. You don't follow him. You awaken to him. But how did such a radically different portrayal coexist with the early church's message? How was this text even tolerated in its time? The answer lies not just in theology, but in power. In the 2nd century, the borders of Christian thought were still being drawn in sand.